So we'll begin so we can remain on time. And first of all, yes, I'd like to welcome you. My name is Patrick Rea and I'm Campaign Director of the charity, PTSD Resolution. In respect of what we're going to be doing this evening, our objective today is twofold. It's to discuss ways in which, with you, we can promote and support veterans' mental health in commerce and the public sector. Also, to encourage organisations to work in partnership with PTSD Resolution in support of the Armed Forces Covenant. Now, we also commemorate today Remembrance Sunday and Armistice Day, which is, of course, falls tomorrow, and actually a particularly significant milestone in the history of PTSD Resolution, which is the 3,000th mental health treatment referral by PTSD Resolution. But we did want to mark the occasion of Remembrance Day by taking 1 minute silence. So if I could ask you to observe that, please. Thank you. So, this evening, let me briefly introduce PTSD Resolution for those who are not already aware of us and what we do. PTSD Resolution is an armed forces charity providing free mental health therapy to traumatized veterans, reservists, and their families. The service is delivered through a network of 200 therapists nationwide and also online during the pandemic. Therapy is fast, effective, and confidential, with some 3,000 referrals to date, as I mentioned earlier. And the charity is, we believe, unique in its lean operation with no salaried staff or assets. We work virtually and funds are used to deliver the therapy, as well as essential research and communication at a cost of just £650 per therapy programme. And of course, it's delivered free to veterans and reservists and their families too. We've just produced a 10-year charity impact report, and hopefully we'll be sending you the link shortly after this webinar. So, meeting your employer commitments, just to cover these briefly, if I may. Corporate and social responsibility is clearly a goal for all responsible organizations today, and mental health in particular is, of course, a major issue, especially with the mental stress resulting from coronavirus, the lockdown, job loss, and general job insecurity too. The Armed Forces Covenant. You'll shortly hear from Lee Thomas, who's representing the AFC today, and he'll be explaining how it helps and encourages organizations to support veterans. The Defence Employer Recognition Scheme. This is an award scheme for employers that demonstrate support and align their values with the Armed Forces Covenant. There are bronze, silver, and gold awards to be won, and again, Lee will be covering this very shortly. I just wanted to touch on briefly working with what those opportunities are for working with us. So firstly, there is our main core charity objective, which is trauma treatment for veteran staff and now for non-forces veterans too, by arrangement with sponsoring organizations. Trauma awareness training for employers. This has proved a very popular course for companies and a wide range of organizations, for line managers, HR staff, and others in how to recognize the symptoms of trauma in their teams Then how to engage with a staff member confidently in helping them to get treatment, whether for us or through a different channel. And another way is you can engage with us for speakers, for speaker engagements and assignments, or we could be your charity of the year, or for payroll giving, for example. You'll find we're very flexible, and we like to think we're creative in coming up with ideas and opportunities to work with organizations. And on that note, we also work with a number of professional and other membership associations. And a good example is with ASIS UK, the Security Industry Professional Association, where we have a great partnership and they've raised considerable funds for us. We provide, for our part, training and workshops on mental health, and also offer confidential support for any ASIS member who has a trauma issue, however it's caused. So our thanks to Graham Bassett and Mike Hurst and other members of the ASIS team. And Mike and Graham introduced us to ASIS and the other way around too. And now they are both PTSD Resolution industry sponsors. We'd just like to briefly thank also Richard Wyatt, who is another ambassador for us, who has championed our cause with the Lions clubs. His Southend club was the first Lions branch to fund the cost of treatment for a local veteran. And since then, he's kindly acted as a reference point, taking calls from other Lions branches that we approach to fund treatment for a local veteran. So there are just a couple of opportunities and ideas. So whether it's through your own organization or your own professional association or other membership organization where we might work together. So that's enough from me by way of introduction. The agenda for tonight, we're going to have a brief message from our president, General Lord Ramsbottom, which will play shortly after this. It's just for 2 minutes. Then next will be Lee Thomas, who for the Armed Forces Covenant and Employer Recognition Scheme will be talking. And then it will be Tony Gauvain, who's chairman of PTSD, followed by Stuart Sharman, our last speaker for the evening, who's deputy MD and head of the ex-forces program at FDM Group, who'll be telling us of FDM's experiences as a partner to PTSD Resolution. Then there will be time for some Q&As. So if you have a question or would like to make a point, I'd invite you to put it into the chat column, please. So without further ado, if I could invite Claire, please, to play the message from Lord Ramsbottom.
In normal years, I would be welcoming you to the River Room in the House of Lords, which is in the gift of the Lord Speaker. And he only allows doing organizations to use it for receptions. And I can think of no more doing organization than PTSD Resolution, of which I've been very proud to be its president for the last 11 years. Speaking about pride, quite rightly, the veterans that it serves are rightly proud of the service to the nation that they've given, and infrequently they sustain mental health problems during their service, which it takes quite a lot of pride to admit to. And what I've always admired about PTSD Resolution, that having made up their minds to go admit that they've got a problem, the essential thing is for the veteran to be seen as quickly as possible. And PTSD Resolution guarantees to have a therapist there within 24 hours, which is often time-saving and life-saving as far as the individual is concerned. And thank you all for your support, because I know that the therapy must include living as normal a life as possible, which includes jobs, and you were in a position to give veterans jobs. And in wishing you well and thank you for attending this reception, I appeal to you to honour the veterans who served their country in future.
So, Lee, if I can invite you to take the camera.
Okay, can you all see the slide it's up on? Just check. Yeah. Okay. Hello, everybody. So my name is Lee Thomas, and I'm the Regional Employer Engagement Director for the South East Reserve Forces and Cadet Association, known as SERFCA, one of a region of the Reserve Forces Associations working under the DRM, the Defence Relationship Management, which is a branch of the Ministry of Defence, and we deal with all aspects of employer engagement, in particular with the Armed Forces Covenant and the Employer Recognition Scheme. And I'm going to talk to you about, or remind you of some of the key points of the Armed Forces Covenant, and in particular, the Employer Recognition Scheme, otherwise known as the ERS. So most of us should be familiar with the Armed Forces Covenant, but I'll run you through some key points. The definition is that the Armed Forces Covenant is a promise by the nation ensuring that those who serve or who have served and their families are treated fairly. Note, treated fairly, not advantageous or given advantages, that they are treated fairly with the rest of society. Some key facts then about the Armed Forces Covenant, if you're not already familiar. We're currently approaching 6,000 signatories. My department and all of the regions, we are given real-time information on every signatory that comes through on a daily basis, and every single signatory can be found because it is listed on a weekly basis on the government website. So if you just want to find out who has signed, you can go onto that website, or if you have any other queries, you can always get in touch with us and we can help you with that. It is a pledge of commitment. There are no set criteria for the Armed Forces Covenant. It is just a pledge of commitment, and this is where there is some misconception, because it is not legally binding. The only legally binding aspect of the Armed Forces Covenant is that the growth and situation of the Armed Forces Covenant and its signatories must be reported on once a year to Parliament. And it is just the first, albeit an important step, of support from the country for the armed forces community. Why do we need your continued support for the Covenant, and why must we keep it strong? Well, there are currently 2.4 million veterans in the UK, and it is estimated that around about 7.4% of them, or 177,000 servicemen and women, have recorded a PTSD incident. That is just with regards to, obviously, the mental health aspect, and not that which is only just one small part of our commitment to the Covenant as a nation. The government, according to their own Covenant annual report from last year, only spend £10 million on veteran mental health. So you can see why it's important that organisations such as PTSD Resolution exist, and why the Covenant is there to guide others. The cost to the economy is unknown. However, a study in Northern Ireland carried out by Queen's University of Belfast, just on the Northern Ireland economy alone, considered that the cost of their economy was £172 million. So if you stretch that out nationwide, it is a massive cost to the economy. So mental health organisations, as I said, such as PTSD Resolution and other charities, are essential in ensuring that we as a nation uphold the Covenant and it is important. But I stress that we as a nation, and not just the signatories, all of us, man, woman and child, should be aware of and at any given opportunity sign up to the covenant and live by its values. But how can we maintain the covenant and our commitment to the armed forces as conflicts fade and as our servicemen and women and our veterans grow older? Well, this is where the Employer Recognition Scheme comes in. Now, the Armed Forces Covenant and the Employer Recognition Scheme are two separate entities, but they are closely linked. You have to sign the Armed Forces Covenant to start the journey, which is the Bronze Award for the Employer Recognition Scheme. And it is also a point now that it is not just enough to sign the Armed Forces Covenant if you're going to be going forward for bronze and silver and gold, that your covenant should be bespoke and relevant to your sector. But it is 3 tiers. And it starts with the pledge. Well, to even get the Bronze Award, you must have signed the Armed Forces Covenant, as I said. But this is where we get the real meat on the bone. You also must demonstrate through your own HR policies by hosting events and offering discounts to servicemen and women and veterans by demonstrating that you are upholding your pledge to the covenant. And what's very, very important for those of you that are thinking or are already on the journey of the ERS, such as PTSD Resolution, and for those of you that I know one of our speakers are the gold, it's very important that you advocate, that you communicate within your sectors and your networks and your PR to spread the word of your commitment to the armed forces and to get them on board and to do it also. Let's talk about or run through quickly some of the criteria that you'd be looking at, certainly to get onto the silver and then the gold awards. So you must, as I said, be a signatory of the Armed Forces Covenant. You must support through your HR policies the employment of service spouses and partners and the veterans. You also must support employees who choose to be and join the reserves, again through such things as 10 days extra paid or unpaid leave a year, so that they can go on their annual camps and obviously have a full understanding of the implications of mobilisation. You must also offer support to your local cadet units, either in the local community or in schools where they obviously have the combined cadet forces. And again, as businesses and organisations, you should be supporting any adult cadet force volunteers so that they can be given extra time off and support when they need it to look after our young people. If relevant, to offer discounts to members of the Armed Forces community, and also actively participate in the Armed Forces Day. The benefits of the Employer Recognition Scheme, I'm happy to talk about that in further depth for the QA session later on, but let's look at some of the facts. 2 reports commissioned in 2016 and 2018 by a Gold Award winner, Deloitte's, the Veterans Report, called Veterans Work and Moving On, did a very in-depth study. I do urge you to look at it when you've got some free time for some light reading. I'll just highlight a couple of points for time. 72% of organisations with active ex-military recruitment programs would definitely recommend employing veterans. Once they employ veterans, they seldom go back. Also, more than half of those organisations that did employ veterans said that they tended to be promoted more quickly than the rest of the general workforce, which tells you of their value and of their ethic, which I'm going to come on to. The value of employing reservists, which is a key part of our job, particularly now with the onus on defence of the country and the use of our reserve forces, because it's certainly moved on from the days of the old TA. Well, if you employ reservists, this is what they'll bring to your organisation. World-class transferable training. I'm sure I don't need really to emphasise too much to this audience and the value of our armed forces and the training that they receive, but obviously self-confidence, determination, teamwork, and problem solving. The CMI estimated in a report that it would cost you the equivalent of £8,000 per employee to give them the relevant staff leadership and teamwork training. And having been employed as an instructor on corporate leadership days, I can tell you that that is a very, very modest figure indeed. Obviously, they're going to be fit and resourceful, and they're going to be turning up to work and hopefully not shying off on sick days, because they're generally fit and motivated individuals. They've got accredited skills, which they can get from their reserve service, which of course is paid for by Defence. Enhanced recruitment and retention, that's not for the reservists themselves, that's actually for your organisation, because they will be drawing pay as a reservist, including their annual bonus, so they will be taking home more money at the end of the year than their civilian equivalent in your organisation, which means they are more likely to stay, and it certainly eases the pressure off on your salary bill. Corporate social responsibility, Patrick mentioned that earlier. You can align your values with that of the armed forces. It is still highly rated with members of the public in every survey done with regards to the values and standards of the armed forces. So you can align your organisation with that. Won't do you any harm at all, thus enhancing your reputation. And finally, at the bottom there, probably the most important one, certainly for the private sector, is effective teams, because you get exceptional individuals who not only lead, because we do tend to emphasise the leadership, but it's also individuals that know how to follow, and that can be often overlooked. I just want to briefly talk about some simple truths about the stigma of veteran mental health, because we're talking about obviously the advantages of recruiting veterans and reservists, and yet here we are also talking about the great work that organisations such as PTSD do. But I think it is important to know that as much as there will always be people, servicemen and women, that need our help, there is a misconception that our veterans and our servicemen and women have a bigger problem than that of general society, and that is not true, as you can see there. In general, the suicide rate, for general society in males is 17 per 100,000, but in the armed forces, the equivalent number is only 8. The rates of mental illness among UK ex-service personnel tend to be lower than that of general society. That's not to say we don't have a problem, but study after study, one that I've cited here from the King's Centre for Military Health Research, found that PTSD rates were low among serving British forces as well. And most personnel do not experience any mental health problems while they are in service or when they transition into civilian life. That being said, however, as I stated earlier, there are 177,000 too many men and women who require our help, which, as I said, emphasises the importance of charities such as PTSD Resolution and your continued support of the Armed Forces Covenant. And as I know some of you, and more importantly, by demonstrating and advocating that support by joining the Employer Recognition Scheme. Before I close, I'd just like to congratulate PTSD Resolution on that point for recently gaining their Bronze Award. And I look forward very much to helping them with their progress onto silver. Obviously, I will be there around to answer any questions on the ERS and the Armed Forces Covenant later. But with that, I thank you very much for your time. And I believe I will be handing over to the chairman of PTSD Resolution, Tony Gauvain.
So off we go. Good evening, everyone. I imagine that every one of you is in or was in or knows someone who is in or was in or knows of someone who is in or was in or associated with the armed forces. I also imagine that you are here because you may have an interest in mental health. Also, I imagine that you may be wondering why we are doing this Zoominar, and maybe even why PTSD Resolution exists and why it has grown during its 10 years of delivering treatments and support to veterans, reservists, and their families. I hope that in the next few minutes I can enlighten you. A typical journey of a veteran seeking help is to go to the GP and or the pub. As you'll see from the picture, the GP route is typically having a diagnosis, probably being prescribed medication, and may or may not lead to some attempt to get compensation. Or when the event happens, and he may go to the GP, but he may more typically go to the pub, which very often leads to a spiral of decline, probably very often ending up in the criminal justice system. Interestingly, this description of a typical veteran's mental health journey chimes with a recent report that is gaining traction that says we must reframe mental health beyond a narrow focus on doctors, diagnoses, and drugs. One problem with the statutory service's adherence to the NHS medical model of treatment is that it pathologizes each symptom, such as anxiety, depression, anger, and so on, so that it accords with the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, known as DSM-5, so that medication can be prescribed. This is in preference very often to addressing the underlying causes of the symptoms. Another problem with the statutory services model is the separation of the treatments offered for so-called complex cases, which deal with more than one event in a person, and comorbid cases where there is more than one disorder in the same person being dealt with at the same time. This tends to delay and prolong and complicate the treatment process. So clients come to us often as a last resort because they don't want medication, or they don't want to wait for appointments, or they don't want to or can't travel a long way for assessment or treatment, or they don't want to sit in a group talking about their experiences, or they've been passed from pillar to post and don't want to keep repeating their story. They're often in despair and at their wits' end. And so are their families and friends. And they're often on the verge of suicide or have certainly contemplated it. We are celebrating the fact that we are now almost on our 3,000th referral. And you can see how we have steadily grown over the 10 years. And you can see in the next slide that we continue to receive an average of 7 new referrals a week. It's interesting to note on the left the spike that occurred in January, which was when Combat Stress announced their reduction of service in England and Wales. Otherwise, we note that spikes tend to occur when the weather is bad or when evocative events occur like Remembrance, Christmas, or towards the end of the month when money is short. But why should they seek us out? When we know how much money and effort has been expended to inform GPs about veterans and to create improving access to psychological therapy, the NHS Transition, Intervention and Liaison Service, the Complex Treatment Service, and the high intensity service? Well, I can only answer that question based on the anecdotal evidence of our clients who report that GPs are not universally understanding of the needs of veterans and often prescribe antidepressant or anti-anxiety medication and often refer on to statutory secondary services. These secondary services often have long waiting lists, require travel, and have variable outcomes. These secondary services, including psychiatry, often prescribe medication to control the symptoms rather than address the causes of the symptoms. And Combat Stress admits to a long waiting list and is currently not accepting clients from England and Wales. And Help for Heroes is cutting back and reorganizing their services. So PTSD Resolution provides an alternative to all these objections. We offer free, prompt, local, brief, effective, private, one-to-one mental health treatment and support to all veterans, reservists, and family members, in person and online and in prisons, without needing a diagnosis, without having to retell or relive their trauma, without having to wait more than a few days for an appointment, without having to travel too far, and without taking a long time. This video, hopefully, describes our referral process and is available from our website.
This short film will describe the referral process used by PTSD Resolution. PTSD Resolution refers exclusively to the 200 human givens therapists across the UK. Referrals are accepted from veterans, reservists and family members privately and without diagnosis. Also from GPs, the NHS, other charities, prisons, probation officers, social services and friends. The call goes to 0300 302 0551 and is answered in working hours by one of our administrative staff, and out of hours a message says that we'll call back next day, or for emergencies alternative advice is given. Our staff respond to the call by asking the caller for some simple administrative details and the reason for the call. If the caller is accepted and wants to go ahead, he or she is asked to call back in a few days' time to be told who the therapist will be. When the caller calls back, he or she will be asked a few more questions and told the name of the therapist. Within only a day or so, the therapist will contact the caller directly and arrange the first appointment. Appointments can be at the therapist's location or the caller's location if transport is difficult. All of this is achieved within a few days. It is then entirely a matter between the caller and the therapist as to when, how often, and where further appointments are made. Typically, measurable positive results are achieved within 6 sessions. If more are needed, they're usually allowed up to an agreed planned ending. Referrals are accepted from and for those with drink or drug addictions, provided they're not under the influence at the time of the sessions. Referrals are accepted from veterans in prison, and sessions are held in prison. Referrals are accepted from family members, and joint sessions are held if thought useful. Referrals are followed up 3 to 6 months later. This service is free to the client and is unique in its speed, proximity, brevity, and effectiveness.
So the report I mentioned earlier about needing to move on from the medical model of doctors, diagnoses, and drugs also chimes with PTSD Resolution's delivery of what we call the recovery model. Part of this is to do with helping people understand how to get their emotional and social needs met. Much of stress, anxiety, and even depression in all human beings stems from their needs not being met in an authentic way. Not only does this fuel fear, but it also generates other negative emotions such as anger, guilt, shame, and so on. This is further aggravated by the social isolation that comes from lockdown and social distancing. It might be useful if we remind ourselves of what those universal needs are. The list summarizes the essential needs to be met in order to achieve and maintain emotional good health. Any one of those that are not met sufficiently or well can generate the sorts of negative emotional reaction I mentioned earlier. There are so many problems which affect people, such as worries about jobs and income security, social exclusion, school closures, working from home, creating huge pressure on families and threatening the need for privacy. And there are also potential risks of domestic violence and the varying levels of fear people have of being infected by this new virus. We cover all of this and more in our training workshop entitled PTSD, Understanding and Recovery, and in our book. And both of these are available by booking through our website. On the question of evidence-based treatment, I would draw the distinction between the nice dogma of evidence-based practice and the human Givens experience of practice-based evidence. NICE only approves guidelines based on the evidence of randomized controlled trials, which cost millions of pounds and take time to achieve, way beyond our resources. Whereas we and others in the business have long advocated the merit of measuring success by casework, that is, the evidence of actual practice. This is briefly but effectively demonstrated on this slide. This is a screen grab from our clinical records database. You'll see on the left that 1,538 clients are showing 2,512 first and last clinical outcome scores in red and impact of event scores in orange. You can see the bulk of the dots are to the right of the median line, thus demonstrating the 78% success rate that we achieve. There is no time now to explain further, but it gives you an idea of the effectiveness of our treatment and the quality of our casework management. Of course, what we do costs money. In order to deliver the treatment and the support free to the client. The average cost for the average program of 6 sessions is £650, which is considerably less than the estimated average cost per client of equivalent treatment through the statutory or other charity services. We achieve this by our therapists accepting a lower rate than they might otherwise charge, or by paying our administrators by the hour rather than by salary, by having a very flat organization, by engaging volunteers for some tasks, and by not having any fixed liabilities or overheads. So we would like to engage with every one of you, either as individuals or with your companies, to explore how we might develop partnerships that can provide treatment for all, training for all, sustainable funding to achieve all. Oh, and by the way, we're looking for 2 further trustees. We'll take questions at the end, but I would now like to introduce Stuart Sharman, who will say a few words.
First of all, good evening, everyone. Lord Ramsbottom, Tony, thank you very much for letting me say a few words, because I believe absolutely intrinsically in what PTSD Resolution delivers. I left the army 7 years ago now to set up an ex-forces program, of which Sean is part of that program. in FDM, which is a FTSE 250 company. So it's a fairly commercially orientated organisation. I'd had 30 years in the Royal Signals, and when I arrived in FDM, they didn't really know how to spell Army, RAF, and Navy. And so I was given a clean sheet of paper, which was great. And really, to date, we've had 590 plus people who've been through the program, and most of that has been to the project management world. But Sean's obviously doing more of a technical role, which is great. And they're consultants that we deploy with their clients on site. And what I would say is that's huge testament to the skill set as people as they come out of the forces. And for me, it's been a fantastic sort of transition for those people where you've seen them sort of really blossom. But of those people that have gone through our program, we've had some 24 people that have then been diagnosed with PTSD. So very early on, I didn't know about PTSD resolution, and I put them through the normal MOD sponsored routes, shall we say. And for me, that just didn't work very well. And people didn't really want to be immersed in a 2-week sitting there talking about the past. They really wanted the options to step forward and to actually build on their future. And so, having found PTSD resolution, we've not looked back. And really, the bottom line is that for all of our consultants who've been diagnosed with PTSD, they've stayed at work. Therefore, their colleagues don't even know that they might have a problem, which is, for me, a significant part of the program. And the flexibility, the timings, the flexibility around when they can do things, the location, the geographical spread, all really add to what PTSD resolution deliver. But the bottom line is that it's worked. And so it's been a fantastic partnership, really, between FDM and PTSD resolution. So, Tony, thank you. All of those people have stayed with FDM. They've worked for us, and they've indeed gone on to have permanent roles with the clients. And last but not least, PTSD's resolution's endorsement of what FDM has done certainly helped us get the gold award for the RM certificate back in 2017. So I could not be a bigger advocate of what PTSD resolution do. Thank you very much.
Patrick, now to organise us in a Q&A session.
So for the Q&A panel, we have Lee Thomas with us again. Thank you, Lee, speaking for the Armed Forces Covenant. Tony, of course, chairman of PTSD. We also have Sean O'Neill, who works with Stuart Sharman at FDM. And Sean is working as an IT consultant for FDM. So hi, Sean, and thank you for joining us. You're on, thanks, great. So to start off the Q&A session, and I would just remind people that you're very welcome to ask questions now. Please just type into the chat column any questions, observations, objections, anything. We'd like to very much to hear from you and have some feedback. And if to kick off, perhaps I could ask Tony to introduce Sean, and perhaps you have some questions.
Okay. Sean, hello. Are you there?
Hello. Yes.
Well done. I can see you. Good. Yeah. Thank you very much for sticking your head above the parapet and agreeing to be part of this. Perhaps very briefly, perhaps you could just tell us a little bit about who you are and where you come from, why you're here.
Yes, I was in the Army from 1997 to 2010 in the Royal Logistic Corps and did tours of Iraq and Kosovo. During my time in the Army, lots of factors came in, and I suffered quite a few mental health issues. After I left the Army, I used to go through a cycle of suffering, getting better, working, and then going back to suffering. And then roughly about a year ago, as I was sort of coming into trying to sort myself out, as I would say, I discovered that I was just taking any job working below what I was capable of. And so I decided to go for jobs that would challenge me mentally and to make me feel better, and doing it not for the sake of working. Coming to the end of sort of how I was treating myself, I just needed to talk to someone, and obviously cost and travel became an issue. So I contacted SAFA, who said, "Oh, we don't offer this, but we know some people who do," and that was PTSD Resolution. And so they offered me 6 sessions, and which helped me massively. And during these sessions, I was told about FDM, as they deal with veterans and either business or IT, and so I was accepted, started training in technical operations, and during my training, I had a placement with a government-owned bank, and since February, I've been working as a consultant on the IT service desk.
Well done. And you're in that job now.
Yes, 9 months now.
And managing with lockdown, I hope.
Yes, I sort of once a week I go to the office, but the other 4 days I'm working from home.
Tony,
well done. Can I just ask, before you found Resolution, how very briefly, what other routes to help did you seek and get?
I saw sort of the doctors and the sort of mental health people within the army, and then outside NHS, various civilian charities, military charities like Combat Stress and Help, and all that. And then they sort of helped here and there, but not completely.
It's interesting. There were still some residual symptoms that you had.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, who found Resolution for you? How did you find it?
I spoke to SAFA, who, as I said before, and they pointed me in your direction, because obviously I just needed sort of therapy, talk-wise, one-on-one therapy, and which is what you provided.
Okay. And what did you, looking back on it, what struck you about the treatment that you got from us in particular?
I think the main one was the actual speed, because as we know, a lot of these charities have long waiting lists, and I found that from the email to yourselves, getting a response to then, yes, we can help you, to getting a therapist was within sort of weeks instead of long months. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, presumably by the time you want to take that step, I mean, you want to get on with it, don't you?
Yes, definitely.
Yeah, quite a remarkably surprising admission to the rest of the community. Yeah. One final question, because it's significant. Did your family, how did they react? Did they notice any difference in you?
I think during the sort of the long years, I think I was sort of kept myself to myself, didn't really get involved with the family, but sort of since speaking to yourselves and starting to work in that, I'm sort of being easier to deal with, to live with, and I think I'm getting more involved with the family again. They notice that they've got a father again now, instead of just that guy who lives with us.
Yeah, brilliant. And how big is your family, your partner and your children?
I've got a wife and 2 children.
So I mean, the point about this, if you extrapolate that number across all the thousands of people who are helped, I mean, the size of the community that benefits and the reduction of cost in theory to the government is enormous. And the cost benefit analysis needs to really be done by a professional to get to the bottom of this, to demonstrate it further. However, I won't bang on about that. Thank you, Sean. We stay there for the other questions.
Questions coming in. There may not be time to, in fact, there won't be time to answer them all, but everyone's invited. Please do explore the website. Do email us too with any specific questions. One question that we're asked by Emily Buchanan is, myself and Gerald found this a refreshing non-medical view of PTSD treatment. Can you tell us a bit more about the kind of treatment you find most effective within such a short time, i.e. just 6 sessions? Tony.
Yeah, okay, thanks for the question. The therapists who we engage are exclusively registered with the Human Givens Institute, and therefore they are trained in human Givens therapy. If you don't know what that is, go to hgi.org.uk or humangivens.com. The essence of human Givens therapy is the very elegant framework in which a therapist works. And one of the key elements of the work is the quality of the rapport that is established between the therapist and the client. Rapport is a word that's often used and given lip service to, but the quality of the rapport determines the quality of the outcomes of the therapy. In particular, in the therapy, there is a particular protocol known as the rewind treatment, also known in NHS parlance as trauma-focused CBT. It involves deep relaxation and guided imagery and the use of the imagination. This particular technique is very effective for all sorts of conditions, and in particular with a specific condition of PTSD. I hope that's a bit of an answer, but I could bang on all evening about it, but I won't.
Thank you for that, Tony. Could I just ask Lee, if I sign up, another question, if I sign up for the AFC, is it legally binding?
No. As I said in the presentation, the only legal aspect to the Armed Forces Covenant presently, although they, there are calls to bring it into law, is that it has to be reported on once a year to Parliament. So if a firm or organisation has signed the Armed Forces Covenant, and this is something my office deals with occasionally, and a veteran has dealings with them and they're unsatisfied, there is a misconception that they have some form of legal recourse, and unfortunately they don't. But there are plans, and I'm sure Stuart would probably be able to tell us more on that. But there are plans within Parliament to put some more powers to it.
Good, thank you, Lee. A question from Monica Sorensen asking, I know that you work in some prisons. What are the barriers to working in all of them? Tony, please.
The prison organisation.
Right.
However, to be a little bit more full, every prison in the country, all 153 or whatever, every prison is autonomous. And so the way in which they want to deal with mental health problems is entirely in the gift of the governor, and through the governor, their various staffs. And every prison, in our experience, and we're currently have worked in 23 prisons, we've currently dealt with or treated, from memory, over 170 prisoners. But the process with each prison is laboriously and painfully unique and ponderous to that prison. And so we have to negotiate on a one-to-one basis in each case in order to be accepted and allowed in. But when we are allowed in and we do the work, then we have a record, an evidence of some prisoners who are happier and better behaved than they would have otherwise been, and are able then to go on release and be happier and better behaved citizens.
Good, thank you, Tony. We're coming towards the end of the hour. There's a point that Rachel Caden has made in the chat section, rather than a question. It's the question in there too. She starts by saying, I previously used PTSD resolution services and my partner is currently using their services. They are fantastic and the work is hugely important. But then, and I'm going to have to paraphrase this, Rachel goes on to query the statistics of the number of veterans that subsequently go on to experience mental health problems. and comments on, and I've heard this myself in my role with the charity, the official statistics for the number of veterans experiencing mental health issues, and particularly the number that go on to very sadly commit suicide. She says, because if we had these numbers to compare, it might show a larger proportion of people suffering. What can we do to help raise awareness for the importance of services such as PTSD resolution?
Oh, Rachel, how lovely to hear indirectly from you. I wish I could see you again. And thank you for the questions. About 55 questions in that question. So, and I'm not sure where to begin. The point about statistics and damn statistics, I don't particularly care to get involved with. All I would say is that that very often the epidemiologists, or the people who number crunch these things, work very strictly to rules. And if you say how many people have got PTSD, it probably is translated into how many people have got a diagnosis of PTSD. Getting a diagnosis of PTSD is a psychiatrically or medically awarded gift, according to the 91 tick box questions that are in the DSM-5. Most people beyond who haven't got a diagnosis but are suffering from the symptoms, that's the majority of people, would of course entirely produce an entirely different statistic, which I have no idea what it would be. So that's like my answer on statistics. As for suicide, what can we do to stop? I mean, that is just such a huge question, and it's so topical, and it is constantly being asked, and there is no one easy answer. And what is staggering about suicide is, what is fascinating is that even their best, closest friends don't know of the ideation, and if they don't know, how's anyone else going to know? But, you know, there are phone numbers to ring. There are small charities in existence that offer a listening ear. There are, of course, the national charities as well. And we are about to embark on an alliance with a new small service charity who's invented an app with a phone number which is permanently manned, and we will place that on the front page of our website. So all we can do is continue to try and reach out and help people know where to go.
Thank you for that. We've got a number of comments in from different people, which I can't go through them all. Derek Hardiman, who mentions the Armed Forces and Veterans Breakfast Clubs organization. We've got Malcolm Farrow talking about ASDIC. I would just say that we do reach out. We work with other veterans associations. We're very keen to network. Tony, do you want to comment on that?
I've had a couple of thoroughly good big boys breakfasts, Derek, in my local area. So I'm keen to go keep in touch with them. We have an arrangement wherever we can to introduce our local therapist in whatever area to the local breakfast club. So, you know, well done you at setting it up, and it's a great setup. And I mean, it's just such a, I just wish there was a quicker and easier way of getting everybody locked into these things, because the product after, I mean, for example, in Kent, one of our trustees has spent several sessions there, but that's produced a local radio broadcast. It's produced a local TV broadcast. And, you know, talk about ways of getting the word out is absolutely tremendous. So well done you, and thank you very much. And as for ASDIC, Malcolm, hello. Likewise, and the sad thing is that the lockdown presumably has prevented people from gathering in the various drop-in centres, which is a shame. But again, we will try and connect our local therapists with our local ASDIC as well as the Breakfast Club.
we're coming to the end of the time, and I'd really like to thank everyone for attending. It's really very much appreciated. Usually we have a rather more formal and fun gathering too in central London as the guest of General Lord Ramsbottom. And thank you for attending this evening. But I'd particularly like to thank our guests, Lee Thomas and Stuart Sharman, and Sean O'Neill in particular. And just as a sort of closing message for this, so working with us, again, we're very, very keen to engage with all sorts of different organizations and associations and membership organizations. We're very flexible. I'm sure you share a common cause with us because you're here tonight in helping our veterans, reservists and their families too. So those opportunities include trauma awareness and support for your veteran staff and also for non-veterans too, and trauma awareness training for employees, which includes both line managers and HR personnel too. And again, there are all sorts of opportunities we're very happy to discuss with you in relation to engaging with us for speakers as your charity of the year or payroll giving. So again, let's please keep in touch after this. We'd very much like to keep in touch with you. There's a lot of information on the website, lots of testimonials, case studies, reports, lots of documentation confirming the good work that PTSD Resolution does. So thank you very much again for attending and stay well. Thank you.